Hello, everybody, and welcome. Kim Daniels, the director of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life at Georgetown University. We're so grateful to have so many of you here with us tonight, with over 3,000 people registered in advance for our conversation on Pope Leo XIV, what happened, why, and what it means for Catholic social thought and public life. Pope Leo brings to the papacy his roots in the United States, an Augustinian religious vocation, decades of ministry in a poor diocese in Peru, and service to Pope Francis and the Church at the Vatican. He began his papacy by calling for peace and mercy and justice in our hurting world. And he spoke of the importance of building bridges, and he's got a track record of doing just that. In choosing the name Leo XIV, our new Holy Father honors Pope Leo XIII, the father of modern Catholic social teaching, who championed the dignity of work and the rights of workers. Pope Leo XIV said he chose his name because Pope Leo XIII in Rerum Novarum addressed the social question, he said, in the context of the first great industrial revolution. And in our own day, the Church offers everyone the treasury of Catholic social teaching in response to another revolution, the digital revolution, and to developments in the field of artificial intelligence that pose new challenges for the defense of human dignity, justice, and labor. So this dialogue will take a deeper look at how Cardinal Robert Prevost became the first pope from the United States and the significance of the choice of the name Leo XIV as his name. We'll also examine the legacy of Leo XIII and the potential role of Catholic social teaching in the leadership of Pope Leo XIV. And in addition, we'll start to explore some of the new things that we face today in our church and our nation and our world, and along with the implications in U.S. public life of a pope with roots in the United States, a ministry in Latin America, and leadership in our global church. So tonight we have four remarkable leaders with us to discuss this. Cardinal Joseph Tobin is the Archbishop of Newark, New Jersey, and he was a participant in the conclave that elected Pope Leo XIV. He came to know the new pope through his service as a member of the Dicastery for Bishops and when they served as leaders of the Redemptorist and Augustinian orders in Rome. Emil Secuda is an Argentinian theologian and the secretary of the Pontifical Commission for Latin America. She's worked closely with Cardinal Robert Prevost in that role, who is, of course, now Pope Leo. Chris White is the author of the new book, Pope Leo XIV, Inside the Conclave and the Dawn of a New Papacy. I've got it right here. And he's the new associate director and senior fellow at the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life. He's also the former Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Reporter. And last but not least, John Carr is the founder of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life, and he served for over 20 years as director of the Department of Justice, Peace, and Human Development at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. So once again, thanks to all of you who are joining us on this live stream. Please share your thoughts on social media and use the hashtag Pope Leo CST, and also please tag the initiative at GUCST Public Life. We'll have an opportunity for questions and answers later on, so please submit questions following the prompt at the bottom of your screen. And of course, we're going to record this dialogue and have it up at our site later on and on our social channels for your viewing. So now let's get started. And I'd like to ask each one of you in turn to answer just one opening question. And Cardinal Tobin, I hope it's okay. We're going to start with you. Based on your experience, your leader expertise, what do you think the most important or surprising thing it is that we should know about the election and leadership of Pope Leo related to Catholic social teaching and public life?
Well, I think he has a good grip on the Catholic identity. Catholic in the sense of not simply a series of norms or rituals, but as a universal, a global perspective. And he's lived that. And I think the church is going to be enriched by that.
I think that's wonderful. Thank you. How about you, Chris? What do you think, based on your experience, your expertise, what do you think is the most important thing for us to know here about Pope Leo and Catholic social teaching?
I think it's that Pope Leo is a missionary pope. He comes from working in the mission field, and his lane is going to be looking at the least of those in society and figuring out how the church can best serve and promote those.
Wonderful. Emil, say, let's go to you. You work so closely with Cardinal Prevost, now Pope Leo. What do you think the most important or surprising thing it is for us to know about his election, his leadership related to Catholic social teaching? And just you're muted. Thank you. We'll come back to you. Should we come back to you? We'll go to John. How about you, John? And we'll come back to you in a second, Emil. Say, what do you think is the most important or surprising thing?
Well, two things for me. One, in a world that's saying religion doesn't matter and the Catholic Church is irrelevant, I was stunned by the response to Pope Francis' funeral and then the obsession with this election that had no candidates, no primaries, and the only exit poll was a puff of smoke. The Pope is a global leader for all of us. The other was the way in which Pope Leo will likely challenge some of our assumptions. Here in the United States, we have some people who, not many, but resisted Pope Francis and said, you know, he just didn't get us. He doesn't know the US. He doesn't know American capitalism. And all that focus on social teaching, we really needed to focus on more important stuff. And it would take a long time to get the cardinals together to find someone who could, bring us back together. And so the stunning thing for me about Pope Leo is how fast he became Pope. In less than 24 hours, cardinals from all over the world elected this American with Latin American experience. And so he gets us. He knows the US, he knows our economy. And the first thing he did was choose the name Leo XIII and place Catholic social teaching at the center of his leadership. So I think the question is not whether Pope Leo gets us, but whether we get Pope Leo.
Thanks for that. So that's wonderful. We have a focus on Catholic mission. We have him as a global leader, a missionary pope. Emil, say, let's go to you. What do you think is the most important or surprising thing we should know about Pope Leo?
Well, in my opinion, is because he is the incarnation of the unity of the difference, because he comes from the center, but he lives in the peripheries. So he knows very well the middle class, the low class, the Vatican, the life, the concrete life, like our new constitution at the Curia Romana said, the predicate de evangelium in the modality of not only war, but just. And his life is like that.
I love that. He comes from the center. He went to the peripheries, also has that experience from the peripheries. That's wonderful. Thank you. I wonder, Cardinal Tobin, if we could come back to you for a longer exchange now. You're the only one of us who was in the Sistine Chapel as you and your fellow cardinals face this awesome task of choosing our next Holy Father. And so obviously we're not asking you to disclose anything you can't share, but what was that like? And what were the cardinals, maybe more importantly, what were the cardinals looking for in a new pope, and how did they share those hopes and come to elect Cardinal Robert Prevost as Pope Leo XIV, and so quickly too?
Yeah, well, this wasn't the first time that the subject came up, actually, Kim. I suppose there were people talking shortly after Francis's election, saying who's going to be the next pope. That people like to run on continuous election cycles. However, most of us, it was after, in the midst of the grief for Francis that we began to have serious conversations. And I arrived in Rome, I think it was the Thursday of Easter week, so effectively 3-4 days after he died. And the meetings had already begun, what are called the general congregations. And at the general congregations, all cardinals can come unless they have some reason why they can't come. But so that meant the non-voting cardinals were there as well. On some days it was a little bit disorganized. I said it was kind of like listening to an argument in an Italian barber shop while watching an episode of The Sopranos. But the actual I think positions were being staked out, and we were hearing what people wanted, expected. I think there were some fellows that said they came in with a candidate or two candidates, but I really, as near as I could tell, and not simply in those meetings, but in the sort of informal meetings, like 30 cardinals getting together at night to pray and to engage in a synodal conversation about who the Holy Spirit seems to be indicating. And it was after one of those evening meetings that I said to the then Cardinal Provost, Bob, I think you may be asked. And so all I'm doing is praying for you, not because his name was on everybody's lips, but on some of the qualities. Someone who knew pastoral ministry, who had been to the peripheries, who knew Pope Francis and his legacy, and some of his predecessors as well, who had some idea of the Catholic Church today, not simply in a single country. There was, and I didn't hear anybody say France first or Italy first or Myanmar first. It was people that were listening, I think, with an international ear. So while I was surprised by the direction the conclave took in a relatively short time, because without risking a late sententia excommunication, I don't think I'm risking it. I can tell you that in those, whatever it was, 24, 40, 36 hours, first, this wasn't the first discussion we'd had. And secondly, it took such an interesting turn that I can't explain it, in geopolitical or even Hudson County or South Side of Chicago terms. Something happened, and I would be hard put to ascribe it to human initiative.
That's always so wonderful to hear. I mean, about the real feeling of the Holy Spirit there. I want to pick up on one thing you said. You talked about the global nature of our church. And of course, you and Cardinal Prevost were both serving together in Rome for a very long time as leaders of your global religious communities, the Redemptorists and the Augustinians. You're also a member of the Dicastery for Bishops. Obviously, Bishop Prevost served in a key role as prefect of the Dicastery. And we're also part of the global process of the Synod on Synodality. And so based on these experiences, can you help us understand a little bit more about who Cardinal Prevost Pope Leo XIV is?
Yeah, I mean, just maybe take that itinerary a little bit deeper. When Pope Leo and I were superiors, he was elected by his religious family 2 years after I was. But we both ended up in the governance of something that's like the Teamsters in Rome, called the Union of Superiors General. It's the union of, it's the smaller of the two unions. The International Union of Superiors General are the women, and they are about 4 times as many as the boys. And we worked together with both unions. Bob was a consultant. I was the vice president for the men. And I think one project we worked on was very interesting, which was kind of a futuring project that tried to look at in 2004. So nearly, what would that be, 60 years after Perfecta Caritatis. What does religious life look, as we entered the 21st century? And Bob was part of that, and I found Bob to be very reflective, not strident at all, but decisive when he needs to be. I used to see him from time to time in Peru when I would go down on a project that Pope Francis wanted done, and Bob was very useful. And I think what struck me in those years was how, in a very divided Episcopal conference, Bob was almost always elected to the leadership, somewhere in what they call the Permanent Council of the Conference of Bishops. And to me, I thought that was extraordinary for someone who was not born in Peru and clearly had a broad degree of acceptance in that divided area. And he certainly brought a new style to the dicastery for bishops, and made sure that everybody was involved and nobody would dominate the argument. And he came on just as the first women joined the dicastery, and I think that I could not, and I spoke with each one from time to time of the three women. They felt perfectly free to say whatever they needed to say, and I believe that they added a great deal. But Bob was very comfortable with that, and
That's wonderful. Well, let me just follow up on that a little bit, Cardinal Tobin. One last question for you, and then we'll move on. Emile talked about Pope Leo, Cardinal Prevost's work on the peripheries as a missionary in Peru. I'm struck that cardinals from the peripheries essentially elected the first pope from the United States, someone who was born in the United States. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how his American roots, obviously his service in Peru and his close work with Pope Francis, but how his growing up in Chicago, education in the United States might shape him. Was it a factor in the election at all? What does that shape his vision?
Well, I think it was, I wouldn't call it the elephant in the room, but it was certainly a question that he wasn't elected unanimously, so I can say that, or maybe I just got excommunicated, I don't know. But I don't think of what were there, six American cardinals or something like that in the room. So out of 133 electors, the other electors, I don't believe, saw him first and foremost, oh my gosh, this is an American. They saw him more as a missionary, as someone who was coming from a theologically fertile country, like this is where Gustavo Gutierrez did a lot of his work. And I came from that wonderful and creative ferment of the Latin American School of Theology, of which Emile can speak so much more. But for a lot of us in the northern part of the Western Hemisphere, those were our teachers as we grew up. And so I think people saw someone who was coming from that much more than they saw. Remember, Americans are only 6% of the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. So it's a good thing to keep in mind. But yeah, I think it was certainly in some of those evening sessions, people talked about it. And sometimes when Bob was there, but Pope Leo was there. Other times, but so it was not ignored, but it wasn't the trump card, so to speak.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Chris, let's go to you now. Thank you, Cardinal Tobin. So first of all, I have to say welcome to the initiative, Chris White, and to Georgetown. This is your 7th day. We've been putting you to work, and thank you for that. We're so happy to have you as our new senior fellow and associate director. I want to also congratulate you again on your new book, which is wonderful. The achievement of writing a book like this in the space of 10 days or so is just remarkable. And we're obviously expecting that kind of pace of work from you sort of going forward. So looking forward to that. I want to just say that one of the reviews of this book called it a wonder, called it sharply concise, filled with his helpful background, just a wonderful way to understand the inner workings of the church. So if you're interested in this topic, and you are if you're signing in here tonight, I urge you to go out and get this book, which is available now. I want to follow the outline of that book, Chris, as we talk a little bit here right now. You have talked first, based on your own reporting, about sort of what the legacy of Pope Francis was in relation to the election of Cardinal Prevost. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. How does that Pope Francis shape his leadership?
Well, let me just say, Kim, that the sentiments are reciprocated, and I'm just thrilled to be at the initiative. I've long been overjoyed to be affiliated with the initiative for participating in dialogues and convenings, but to call it my home is just a real pleasure. And you say that the book is succinct, and I just have to say I only had a choice to make it succinct in 10 days. There's hard to do more than 150 pages. But you asked the question about Pope Francis and how he relates to Pope Leo's election. And I don't think you can understand Pope Leo without understanding Pope Francis. And earlier you mentioned the Synod. And the Synod and synodality was Pope Francis's legacy project. And I think it's fair to say in many respects that the conclave was sort of a referendum on synodality. We can think back to Pope Francis's line in The Joy of the Gospel, his 2013 programmatic document that time is greater than space. And I think Pope Francis, in the 12 years that he was Pope, initiated processes in the Catholic Church. He opened up spaces for questions to be asked, for systems to be challenged, for structures to be rethought. How the church might become more welcoming, more participatory, less clericalist. And these questions really were given life and space through the Synod on Synodality, this multi-years process of consultation with Catholics all around the globe on how their church might become more hospitable to more Catholics. And I think that excited so many people around the world, but it also made some people nervous. And the cardinals had to decide after Francis's death that they wanted to continue in that direction of travel. And I think the election of Leo is a resounding yes. And I think the cardinals decided they wanted someone who could take those processes that Francis started and pull those threads together and be a real manager for the future. And I think that's what they have in Leo.
Avanti, as they say, as I think you said in your book from our friend Anna Rollins. Let me ask you a different question. How did the cardinals, Cardinal Tobin's mentioned the general congregations, how did the cardinals prepare for the conclave? And what do we know about what they were looking for and how they came together so quickly? Help us out.
Well, I mean, it's tough to say this when I'm talking to a cardinal on this dialogue, but I think, what's very clear, and we heard this from Cardinal Tobin earlier, is that, so much of what they talked about were the needs of the church and the needs of the world. And sort of taking stock of the realities of church life and the geopolitical situation today. And so they talked about issues before they talked about a candidate. I think they sort of talked about a particular profile before any one person emerged. But then they, of course, eventually got specific. And of course, the longtime conventional wisdom was that no one from the United States could ever become Pope, especially with the United States as a superpower. The idea that a pope and a president being from the same country would just be too much power concentrated in one place. But as Cardinal Tobin just described, the fact that Cardinal Prevost was from the United States was almost secondary. I think, some have described him as a globalist. He spent a third of his life in the United States, a third in Latin America, and a third in Europe. I use the term missionary because I think that best describes who he is. But I think that was the driving factor. And then geography, as many cardinals have noted, just sort of fell to the wayside because he wasn't really thought of as your typical sort of American, the sort of caricature of the sort of brash, backslapping American that many people have in their minds. He was someone that actually is, trained in the ways of the world, and people just saw him as sort of sui generis.
Interesting. Wonderful. One last question for you, Chris. We're here to talk about Catholic social teaching and Pope Leo XIV in relation to Catholic social teaching. He has certainly referenced that, obviously, with his choice of name, but also in many, many other sort of remarks he's made since his election. Based on your reporting, who is Pope Leo XIV? What's your sense of how he sees his developing mission and message in light of Catholic social teaching?
Yeah, I think, these are early days. And so I think we have to give him space to define his own ministry. But I think if we go back to 2013, when Pope Francis was shortly after he was elected, his first interview was with Jesuit Father Antonio Spadaro. And that was his first question: who is Jorge Mario Bergoglio? And he really surprised people because he said, I'm a sinner. That was who he was. I think if you were to put that question to Cardinal Pope Leo, he would draw in his Augustinian roots. He was so formed by the Augustinian tradition of living life in a community. And what everyone has mentioned that has known him for a very long time, certainly my experience getting to know him in the 2 years before he was elected Pope, was that he was a listener. He really takes time to value people's opinions, their ideas. He's dedicated to letting people have a seat at the table before he makes decisions. So perhaps he might say, I'm a listener.
Wonderful. Emilce, let's turn to you now. First of all, we're so grateful for you being here with us, given the time difference of this late night. So thanks very much. You are, of course, a very distinguished theologian. You were appointed by Pope Francis as Secretary of the Pontifical Commission for Latin America at the Holy See. And in that role, you worked very closely with Cardinal Prevost, now Pope Leo XIV, of course. So as a theologian, as a very high-ranking woman in the Curia, what did you take away from working with Cardinal Prevost, and what do you expect of him as Pope Leo XIV?
Well, I can to say that what I learned from him in 2 years that we worked together, but I can tell you how was the experience that we shared together, because Cardinal Prevost and myself arrived at the life of Pope Francis at the end of the pontificate. We were together the last 2 years of Pope Francis, and we were so close to Pope Francis. And that was a special situation between us, because we were here 2 years, listen the clock, no? Tick tack, and the time was running. And that is a deep experience. It's an unusual experience. And what I learned there, maybe he too, is the 5 principles of Pope Francis. Because Chris Wise mentioned time is more than the place. But the 5 principles of Pope Francis is organization is more than the time. And I don't understand that when he told me that. But one day, when he told me that I will have a new boss, and he said, it's like you. You both share to be part of 2 worlds, no? North America and half America, but in a positive way, no? And I don't understand, but when I saw him appear in the balcony dressed in white, was a big surprise. But at the same time, I understand what it means, why the organization is more than the time, because I am sure Pope Leo is the continuity of Pope Francis, but in the difference. Not only because they are different persons born in different contexts and work in different contexts. Pope Francis was the Archbishop of a big city, as Buenos Aires is, with a strong political organization, worker organization. And Pope Leo was a bishop in the periphery of Latin America, far away of the center. Not only for that, but because 12 years is a lot of time, and the world is other. The word of Pope Leo is not the same word that Pope Francis. So he will be the continuity, but in the difference, and he must be that. So I think we learned together what strong is to work with the Pope. And in my case, we don't know in that time that I was working with 2 popes. And I think I have no time in my life to understand that. But I see closely the process, and I am so happy.
What a remarkable experience to work closely with 2 popes, right? And I think that's a wonderful reflection on the continuity and change and development that we see. I'm also struck by the fact what a other remarkable happening that your doctoral research argued that Catholic social teaching originated in the United States, brought to Rome through the efforts of 19th century American bishops who played a pivotal role in encouraging Pope Leo XIII to advocate for workers. You recently wrote about this in America. History's now, you said, come full circle with an American Pope. So how do you think this historic American call to Leo XIII at the end of the 19th century to defend the rights of workers has come full circle? What did you mean by that? And what are the ways in which Pope Leo XIV might affirm or deepen and expand on Catholic social teaching?
Well, that is another big surprise, because in that moment, that the situation is similar than today is the situation in United States. In that moment, United States was the first global power at the beginning of the industrial capitalism. And United States opened the doors to migrants, and migrants that speak English. But that migrants from Ireland arrived, and they was worker, and they work like a slave. And in that moment, the state resists to give them the citizenship. Because if you arrive to the civil rights, you can get them the social rights. But the excuse to refuse that was not the social rights or the social justice. The excuse was that they will be papisms, because the argument was it's impossible to serve it at the state and at the Pope. And the Irish bishops start to organize the workers. And that the first modern republic that born aristocratic became democratic, because the workers was organized by the bishops from Ireland, Jesuits in that time. And then that bishops went to Rome, because Rome accused to that people of Americanism. Because in that moment, the Vatican was against of the new liberalism. And that bishops talked with Leo XIII and said, careful, because the workers in union in Europe are organized by the socialism. So the church must to take the decision to stand of the place of the workers. But now we are in a similar situation, but the Pope is the person who is coming to say careful, we must to be in the place of the social justice, because that is the core of the social teaching of the church. And when he appeared in the balcony, he said, I am going to build bridges, and justice is the guarantee of the peace. Of course, he is a missionary, and the first word that I listened from his mouth was Jesus Christ. He said, we're going to start the meeting, he said, we are going to cry what our Jesus Christ teach us. No? And of course, he's going to put Jesus Christ at the center of his pontificate, but in concrete, with social justice. I think he can help a lot, and it's necessary to go back to that situation, how to organize the hope of our people. That was the idea of Pope Francis, how organize the hope. I think he is a person to do that.
Well, I find it fascinating, right, to talk about, of course, Jesus Christ is at the center of Catholic social teaching, and you can't divorce these Catholic social teaching from an understanding and the way in which Christ is the center of our hope. I love your reflection on this, and I also love the way you've reflected on Pope Francis generally. You wrote a really thoughtful book called Paraliere a Francisco, and it talks about reading Francis. I wonder how you might recommend, if all of us are starting to try to understand how to read Pope Leo, essentially, if you were to say, how should we do that? How should we start to prepare to understand Pope Leo? What would you recommend?
Well, it was easy to me write a book about how to read Pope Francis, because we were Argentines, and we have the same professors For example, Juan Carlos Escanone, a famous Jesuit. And so it was easy to me to write a book about that. In this case, I think it's your turn. American and Peruvian must to teach me how to read Pope Leo. No? But we are, at the same time, we are at the beginning of the pontificate. And as Cardinal Tobin and Chris said, he's a missionary. And to read, in my opinion, to read Pope Leo, we must to do the experience, to habitate the peripheries, to be close of the poor people, to work with them, to pray with them, not about them, with them. No? How Pope Francis said, it's not the option for the poor, it's the option with the poor. To understand Pope Leo, we must to do that experience. We must to do as the document of Aparecida from the Bishop of Latin America said, all of us are missionary disciples, all of us, each of us, and we must to put in practice that, and then we must to write a book about what is Pope Leo is teaching us.
Wonderful, thank you. Missionary disciples, a poor church for the poor, being with the poor. I think that's something we are going to see going forward. Thank you very much. So John, let's come to you now. And I love that we're talking now about reading Pope Leo in the context of an American application of Catholic social teaching. Of course, you've spent most of your life trying to help share Catholic social teaching and apply it here in the United States, first in decades of leadership at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and then, of course, here as the founder of our initiative. What was your reaction when you heard the name, our new Holy Father had chosen the name Pope Leo XIV? Who was Pope Leo XIII? What was the message of Rerum Novarum, his major encyclical on these issues? And how is it relevant and important today?
Well, I was deeply moved. There are not a lot of us who read social encyclicals for fun. So Rerum Novarum and Pope Leo the 13th are a big part of our lives. In fact, when they said Prevost Leo, I knew more about Leo the 13th than Cardinal Prevost. The only thing I knew about the new Pope was what I read in Chris White's profile of him. But and I was really encouraged. You quoted what he said about the name. I chose the name because I wanted to follow Pope Leo XIII in addressing the social question, and said we need to offer everyone the treasury of the church's social teaching to defend human dignity, justice, and labor. And he's placed that at the center of his leadership. The first moment of his papacy is, what name will you be called by? And he said, Leo. And he said, I did that for Leo XIII. So who was he? Well, he was an Italian. He was born in 1810. He was the sixth of 7 children. I read that they elected him at 69. People didn't live very long in those days, and they assumed it would be a short pontificate. They were wrong. It was 25 years. He ended the 18th century and began the 19th century. The other way around, began the 19th century, began the 20th century and ended the 19th century. He's the first pope to appear on film. If you Google him, there's a scratchy little movie. He wrote more encyclicals than any pope before or since. I've read Rerum Novarum a bunch of times. He wrote 12 encyclicals on the Rosary. I have not read those. That can be another dialogue. After his death, he was called Leo the Great. And part of his greatness was he called the church to engage the world, not retreat from it. He was the Pope at a time of rapid industrialization, enormous social and economic upheaval, socialist, communist movements. So he writes this historic letter in 1891 called Rerum Novarum, New Things, and launched the modern tradition of Catholic social teaching. Not that long, less than 100 pages, 5 sections, but it changed the history of the church. It's important to remember what the rest of the title was. It's called On the Condition of Labor. And I just want to quote a couple lines so you get some sense of the urgency and the passion and the substance. His message was, we must remedy, these are his words, a remedy must be found quickly for the misery and wretchedness pressing so unjustly on the majority of the working class. And then the richer class have many ways of shielding themselves and stand less in need of help from the state, whereas the mass of the poor have no resources of their own to fall back upon and must chiefly depend on the assistance of the state. And it is for this reason that wage earners, since they mostly belong to in the mass of the needy, should be especially cared for and protected by the government. Lots of people will try and spin Rerum Novarum and Leo XIII. This was a man that was angry about how workers and their families were being treated. And his major contributions in Rerum Novarum was it began with the dignity of the human person. That was not where the church often began its teaching, with the dignity of work. On a struggle between workers and owners, he came down on the side of workers, living wage and decent working conditions, and offered a papal endorsement of unions and the right to organize. He placed the family at the center of society. He affirmed the right to private property, as opposed to some socialists, and its limitations, how it ought to serve the common good. He opposed both state socialism and communism, and he also opposed unrestrained capitalism as threats to human dignity. He outlined the limitations of the state and the responsibility of the state to protect the weak and workers. Interestingly, he talked a lot about class and the working class, but he warned against class struggle. He called for cooperation for justice and the common good. And he laid a firm foundation for the future of Catholic social teaching over the last 135 years. Why is it important today? The new things of 1891 are the old things of 2025. In our own country, workers don't make enough to support a family. Healthcare is unaffordable for many. Wages are inadequate. Unions are often resistant. Around the world, millions live in desperation, unable to provide a decent life for their family by their work. So we shouldn't jump over the message of Rerum Novarum. It takes different forms. But Pope Leo says there are new challenges, particularly artificial intelligence. And one of the things is we take a different lens. What does that mean for human dignity, for workers, for solidarity, for the poor, for care for creation? We have a different way of looking at the world. We did in 1891 and we do today. And Pope Leo picks up that mantle from his predecessor.
Thanks for that. And let me pick up on that and ask you to explore it a little bit more, John. In terms of our current context today, what are the implications or possible impacts for you as Catholics of a Pope who is committed to sharing and acting on Catholic social teaching like Pope Leo XIV is? How might he encourage but also challenge you as Catholics?
Let me make a little confession here. I think Pope Leo, with his focus on Catholic social teaching, could help us get beyond some of the, what I call the pick-a-pope ecclesiology that haunts our church. When folks say, I'm part of the John Paul II generation, I'm a Benedict kind of Catholic, I'm part of Team Francis. So now a lot of us are looking at what Pope Leo wears or what language he speaks or his words and language to see, quote, if he's on our side. I think the question might be, are we on his side? In fact, by placing Catholic social teaching at the middle of his papacy, I would suggest that Pope Leo is lifting up one of the areas of greatest unity between himself John Paul II, Benedict, and Pope Francis. They, in their own ways, their own words, different priorities, different emphases, they taught, affirmed, extended Catholic social teaching. Each of them insisted that Catholic social teaching was real doctrine, not marginal. It was integral, not optional, that it's at the heart of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, not a matter of personal preference. John Paul II was the apostle of solidarity. Benedict was a great teacher of social teaching, and Francis exemplified that in everything else. If we take this witness seriously, the common witness, we might have to change our behaviors, our attitudes. Some of us were tempted to apologize for all things Biden, including the opposition to any restrictions on abortion. I read in a Catholic publication, someone said that President Trump is running the most Catholic, the most Christian administration either. We should not be cheerleaders for any politician. We should not be apologists for any administration. We should challenge all of them. And what it means is walking away from some of that partisanship. That has meaning in this moment. The lesson Rerum Novarum, the lesson of Catholic social teaching, means we can't support taking food from hungry families or healthcare from sick families or abandoning our commitment to help the poorest people on earth. We can't forget about unborn children who seem to be lost in the debate about abortion after Dodd's. We can't sit by and watch immigrants who are part of our community be demonized and deported. They're not criminals. And we can't abandon our traditions of providing some welcome for refugees as they're fleeing oppression. Could we come together across some of our lines? I think Pope Leo might invite us to do that.
Well, and thanks for that, John. And I think just today or yesterday, Cardinal Cupich quoted Pope John Paul II to the effect of, we are here as Catholics to stand with the poor, as American Catholics to stand with the poor, the needy. We can't back away from that. I mean, I think that really is a theme that crosses all division in our church here in the United States and more broadly. I want to open it up to questions now. We have so many questions coming in, so thank you very much for that, and please continue to send them in. And I'm going to start, Chris, with one for you. I was in Rome during the conclave, sort of right before the conclave and during it. It was just this remarkable moment in the life of our church. You just really experienced the global nature of our church, its history, its tradition. You were covering it as a reporter. What did you take from that? Like, what was it like to cover it, really looking at it through the lens of a journalist?
Yeah, I think it will take many, many years to absorb just how heady those days were. I mean, it was really, from April 21st, from when Pope Francis died, to May 8th, when Pope Leo was elected. The eyes of the world, the entire world almost, were on Rome. And it was a tremendous opportunity, for on television screens around the clock. The world was sort of, reminded of who Pope Francis was, his priorities, his great memorable gestures, his outreach to those on the margins. And I think it was just, you saw an outpouring of appreciation for what he represented in a time of just, tremendous cruelty in the world. Pope Francis was a great sign of compassion and humanity. And the world mourned that. And in mourning that, I think they realized the power of the papacy. And so in a sense, I think the world was rooting for a good leader. They wanted someone to follow him that would uphold those same values. And so certainly those 2 days where, every eye was on one little tiny chimney, you had this real anticipation, anxiety, nervousness, but investment in who walked out on the balcony. And what I think was remarkable, you had the period, it was about an hour between the time the white smoke emerged to Pope Leo's appearance on the balcony. And what was very just palpable from, I was with my colleagues at NBC and MSNBC, it didn't matter if you were Catholic or not, you were so much rooting for whoever walked out there, and you wanted nothing but success. And it just showed you the power of the office and the potential there, and how much we're hoping and rooting for a Pope to continue in the great tradition of Pope Francis of being that great beacon of hope.
Thanks for that, Chris. Cardinal Tobin, we have one for you now. Chris mentioned the Synod earlier, the Synod on Synodality, this global consultation process started by Pope Francis that aims to make our church more responsive and to involve lay people in decision-making, really listen. I wonder, we have a question here about the future of synodality under Pope Leo XIV, how Francis's efforts will continue, how they might change. I'm struck that he mentioned the Synod from that balcony that Chris was just talking about. What are your thoughts on that? You were very involved in that process as well.
Yeah, I think it became clear to me in the first years of Pope Francis's service that the long game was synodality, not as a goal in itself, but as a way of reaching the challenges, facing the challenges that the church has to confront today. And his great encyclicals and apostolic exhortations, I think, remain pie in the sky without the premise of a synodal church. And maybe we had to struggle with that at the beginning to say, now how on earth are we going to really enter, Laudato Si, Fratelli Tutti? And then when the synodal process came up, and when he resisted any effort to take the eye off the ball and pursue a shiny object as a synod, that was very intentional. I don't think it was an oversight, even though I'm willing to give a 91-year-old the benefit of the doubt. But when the Cardinal Dean preached the homily, everybody was struck by how honest he was about the accomplishments of Pope Francis. But he did not mention, without any reference to synodality. I don't think that was an accident. I think it represents one opinion. Nor do I think it was an accident that not only on the balcony, but the following day, in his first real celebration of the Eucharist as Pope with the College of Cardinals, that was his commitment to synodality was very clear. So I think without that, you can say social justice, but the danger is it's going to be either cast off as the flavor of the month, or something that exists only in theory. And I think somebody else said that reality is more important than ideas. And I think the other area that's not totally alien from synodality is ecumenism. And he has certainly made an early commitment to ecumenism. He's going to go probably for the Feast of St. Andrew to the Constantinople, Istanbul, with the Greek Orthodox Archbishop of New York and the Primate for America, North America, and a rum-dum bishop from across the Hudson, about 50 other Orthodox and Roman Catholic leaders in a couple of weeks, the week after next. So he's making time even at Castel Gandolfo to form these relationships that aren't new to him, but are essential for the program he's espoused.
Thanks for that, Cardinal Tobin. Emil, here's a question I'm going to ask you. We have several questions asking what we might expect. First of all, I should say again, you're one of the most senior women in the Vatican, and you've had a leading role there and know what it's like to work there. And the question that I have here is, what might we expect from Pope Leo regarding women in leadership positions? What's it like to work with him in that regard? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, I don't know. I am not Pope Leo. I like that question. I think, well, he's great with me as woman, and we can listen other women that work with him in Chiclayo, for example, and the opinions always are great. But I would like to add something that Cardinal Tobin said, because to continue with the synodality and to understand what it means to Pope Leo, it's important to remember the 6 points that he put on the table in his first meeting with the cardinals. Because there it's clear that we can't to put in concrete synodality if we put outside of the synodality 2 ideas that come from the Vatican Council and that he puts there of one of that 6 principles. One is the dialogue with the mother world, because synodality is not only with the people who is around the priest or in the parish, neither interreligious or ecumenical dialogue only. Synodality is a dialogue with the world, with the actual world, with Baptist people or no. But it's important to go back to the Vatican Council to understand what it means. It's not a conversation between Catholic people, it's with the world. And that dialogue is real, the social dialogue that is at the center of the social teaching of the church. Because social teaching of the church is not only to take care of the human dignity, because other religions speak about that. But the social teaching of the church is not charity, it's an institution. We have charities in other religions, but we have not a social doctrine of the church as institution. And we can understand that institution without synodality in the terms of dialogue with the world, that is a social dialogue, and the sensus fidei fidelium, because synodality is not listen like a psychoanalyst. No. It's listen the other in the decisions. And that is fidei fidelium. Listen the others in the decision. And in that way, Prevost, now Pope Leo XIV, he knows very well how to do that. Maybe you can listen, many people when I speak about him say, oh, he is a man who listen. But not listen, and you can talk like a woman. No, he is listening, which is your decision over one topic. And he do that also with women, and that is not common.
Thank you for that. And I also thank you for emphasizing the idea that that synodality in particular is in line with Vatican II and the understanding of being in dialogue with the world, and that's at the center of Catholic social teaching. I think that's important for us to talk about here tonight as well. We're running up on our time, and I want to ask one final question of everybody, just a quick question. And John, I think I'll start with you. In light of what we've heard here tonight, in light of the conversation we've had, what would you tell our listeners that they should be thinking about maybe doing differently to anticipate and support Pope Leo XIV in his leadership as he acts on Catholic social teaching? How might we do this here in the United States? John, going to you.
Before I recommend to others, I have to look to myself. I feel really conflicted. 12 years ago this month, we started the initiative. It's just been terrific. And what a great ride. Kim, you as director are taking it forward. We have an expanded team. We're doing exactly what we should be doing with your support of people on the call. I'm upstairs in my house. We're getting our whole gang together. 18 of us are going away for a week. Family and work are terrific. And I have so much to be thankful for. And I am so discouraged. The things that I've fought for, the things that I have worked for many years are being taken apart in front of us. And, where do you get hope? Where do you get faith? for me, I have to go back to the basics, which is that these principles of Catholic social teaching offer the best way forward for me, for our nation, and for our church. And going back to human dignity and solidarity and care for creation, that's the path forward. And persistence and consistency will take us forward. So conflict, but hope. And that's the path Pope Leo has taken. That's probably the path I ought to take and others ought to take.
Thanks for that. Chris, how about you? What do you think people who are listening tonight should take away from this conversation? How can they help support Pope Leo's leadership in advancing Catholic social teaching?
Kim, what I'm going to say is maybe slightly hypocritical as someone who's just written a book on Pope Leo, which I hope is meant to offer a fair interpretive key of understanding Pope Leo. But I think back to the episode of The West Wing, where there's the great line, "Let Bartlett be Bartlett." And I think many of us would do well to let Leo be Leo and let him set his own agenda before we try to claim him for any particular path or party.
I think that's a great message. Thank you so much, Chris. Emil, how about yourself? What do you think people should take away from our conversation if they wanted to support Pope Leo's leadership? What should they do? How should we respond?
I think the central idea is that the church continue walking from the center to the peripheries and from the peripheries to the center, that all of us insist that the people of God is sitting at the same table, at the same level, and that this Pope, the new Pope, our Pope, is one of us finally. And he understands us, and he will be our voice at the moment with 62 wars open around the world. He will be our voice of peace through the social justice.
Thank you. And I'm so glad that you mentioned the need for peace and his call for peace, because that's such an important, of course, dimension of Catholic social teaching. And there's such a need for it. We pray for it every day in our world, which sometimes seems to be on fire. Cardinal Tobin, let's let you have the last word. What do you think people watching here tonight should do? What should they do differently in response to Pope Leo? How can we be supportive of his efforts?
Well, I really think that he's going to be his own man. He's going to, when he speaks English, speak a language that a lot of Americans understand. When he speaks Spanish, he's going to speak a language that a lot of Americans understand. However, I would put it in the light of the intervention that Jorge Bergoglio made at just before the 2013 conclave was to begin. Very short one, but it was very impactful. When he talked about the image in Revelations where Jesus is at the door, and his words are, if they open the door, I'll come in and I'll have a meal with them. Francis's insight into that is Jesus may well be asking for the door to open, but from the inside out, to let Jesus out. And he talked about a church that goes out of itself in the same way that its master does. He's a living example of what an American can look like that goes out of himself, not simply because he went and lived in another country or countries and speaks different languages, but he doesn't see the world the same way. And please God, we're not going to see the world the same way by listening to him and following him. So that's my hope for us. And sometimes the best plants and the most hardy plants are the ones that were raised in one environment and planted in another, because the tree can grow, but it's got to change.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful way to end this conversation, because I think that message of Cardinal Prevost Pope Leo's humble service and going outward is just such an important way for us to understand what we're called to do as well. I want to thank everybody who's here with us, Cardinal Tobin, Emile Say, Chris, John. Thank all of you who are watching for joining us for this discussion. And I want to remind you, of course, that this will be posted on our website, posted on our social media channels. We'll have lots of follow-up resources at our site as well if you're interested in those. So those are there already. Please go find them. They're really interesting. I mentioned at the beginning that Chris White is a new member of our team, but I want to also hold up Michaela Beckensall, who is our new program officer, and Blaine Bayeni, who is our new projects coordinator. We're so glad to have them with us as well here at the initiative. And of course, I want to thank Kimberly Mazik, Anna Gordon, Christian Sunan, as always, for their help in putting this conversation together. So finally, please join me in thanking Cardinal Joseph Tobin, Emile Sekuda, Christopher White, and John Carr for being a part of this public dialogue on Pope Leo XIV, what happened, why, and what it means for Catholic social thought and U.S. public life. We're looking forward to a great fall ahead of us here at the initiative. We've got a lot of exciting things planned, so please be sure to keep an eye on our website and social channels for the latest information. Thank you for being here with us tonight. Have a wonderful night.